Thank you, and now that you all had some wine, hopefully this talk will go a bit more quickly and easily for all of us. I first want to say thank you to Charles and Karen, who I'm getting to meet, but I'm in email contact at last, with all the time. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak here about children's facial palsy. Facial palsy, I think the treatment's always been regarded as a bit of a niche, really, but I think finally it's come of age, and in no small part due to charities like Facial Palsy in the UK, and ideal only in children's facial palsy, so that's a niche within a niche, so a niche squared, I guess. So what I'm going to talk about today is children's facial palsy and what we can hopefully do about it together. So one of the things I get asked is, what kids get facial palsy, and I know many of you have first-hand experience. We know that it doesn't respect age or creed or wealth or anything like that. We know that across the board it causes immense differences in terms of social interaction and self-esteem. But in children it has a unique issue, and that has a massive impact on their development into young adults. One of the things I see are families coming into the clinic, and their children's been born with a facial palsy, usually a baby, and they're feeling really guilty. They'll try and find an explanation, like the baby wasn't lying right, I had a funny meal down at KFC or something like that. And one of the things I try and get across is to say, look, it's not your fault. And at that point I realised treating children with facial palsy is not just treating the child, it's treating the whole family altogether. And that's quite a challenge, but enjoy. So this is Zach. Zach's mum's Kerry, and she's with the Mebius Research Trust, and she's been a great resource to me. She's been educating me about Mebius syndrome and all the areas of it that I wouldn't normally have a contact with as a surgeon. And this is one of the very rare causes of facial palsy. Much more commonly, children will come with an isolated facial palsy for no apparent reason. Or they may have had some surgery for a tumour, or they'll have had an accident. Children with facial palsy have a different set of issues from us. So in adults with facial palsy, a lot of the attention is directed to the eye and problems with the eye, as well as speech and breathing through their nose. Now, children haven't started to sag like I'm just starting to, and so they don't really have those problems. So their problems really revolve around their appearance and the social effects of that, and their interaction with their peers. The other interesting thing about children is that they've never had normal facial nerve functions that have been born with it, so they don't have the loss or the sort of grief reaction they get at losing something that you've had. Most of the youngest children have absolutely no idea. They don't notice any difference. They're running around the clinic. You have to run around after them, trying to keep them under control. And then around about the age of 4 or 5, they start to ask questions like, "Mummy, why is my smile slightly different?" Or their peers at school will ask them, why is your smile different? Or the parents will ask at the school gate, why is Johnny looking a bit different? And so these are really awkward and difficult things for the children and their families to come to terms with. When children start to develop peer groups, especially during teenage years, then they find, especially with the girls, they can form cliques. You can either be in or you can be out. You can get bullying, and we know in this day and age of the internet, you've got some really nasty ways of getting hold of people even in their own home. So bullying can be an issue. Also at school, it has an impact on their career. So if you're being bullied at school, you tend to withdraw, you don't interact. The teacher thinks that the child's not really getting involved in the schoolwork. Teachers are hard-pressed to work. They may not have the time to put in to look after these children, and so they start falling behind in school. They don't get the grades. They don't get the qualifications they need to get the job that they want necessarily. So that if you want your child to be an engineer or an astronaut or, God forbid, a doctor, then they may find themselves facing a very different set of issues than what they have with other children. One of the biggest predictors for how children react to their difference is the parental reaction. Parents that are very concerned about it, keep raising the issue of the child, keep pointing out the difference, have a much more negative impact on the child than those parents who simply treat it as, little Johnny is completely normal, so what about his face? Why, he's fine, okay, so don't worry about it. Those children tend to grow up very well adjusted and coping, and they're often the ones who think, I don't want your surgery, it's fine. I'm okay as I am, thank you very much. So what can we do to help? I'm a surgeon, so all I want to do is operate, so the solution is operation, right? But actually there's a lot more than that. And operations, you'll be glad to know, are right down the end of the scale. So one of the most important things we're trying to do is set up our local group, a family group, because a lot of families have no idea that there's anybody else in the world with this problem, and especially the children. They're the only one in the school, right? And when you're a child, your school is virtually a whole social network. So one of the things we're trying to set up at the moment is a family group, and then summer we're hopefully going to do a barbecue, get all the families together, get some health professionals together to give some talks, get some patients and families to talk, and then more importantly, everyone just gets to mingle. And I think allowing people to mix is really important, and charities like Facial Palsy UK give us the opportunity, and through your help, charity, give us the opportunity to set up these networks and coordinate across the country. The other thing is helping kids in school by advocating for these children. If a child has a brain tumour, they've had it removed, they've become deaf, they have a facial palsy, we need to get them sitting at the front of the class. They may need special attention, they may need time to catch up from time off from school. So our role is to try and advocate through that, advocate for them through our team, as well as contacting support services. So I'll digress very quickly to when I turned up in Liverpool. We had an unmet need, and that was one of my colleagues, Christian Duncan, realised we had all these patients with facial palsy and nobody in the region could do anything. And the Merseyside region, Manchester is a great region, just like flat earth. And so one of the first things I had to do was, rather than dive in and do loads of operations to try and show off, was to try and set up our MDT and try and get a group of like-minded individuals together to form this team and provide a coordinated structure for their care. So we formed our MDT. Much of it is for supportive treatment for the children, as well as providing surgical and other therapies. But all the time, our ethos is to try and ask ourselves, what does the patient want? There's no point giving a child a really good smile when actually they were bothered about their eye or something else. So the MDT, I think, is a really important way of treating patients, because you get these multiple specialties together, and more importantly, we have our speech and language therapy, our physiotherapists and psychologists there, who are all providing support and non-interventional, non-operational therapies that can give great improvement to the quality of life. Our MDT, as it stands, as a virtual MDT, because one thing I realised pretty quickly is kids don't like walking to a room with 12 strangers staring at them, and awkward teenagers, of which I definitely remember being one, was also didn't like being stared at very much. So we usually have a first contact with one of our members of the team, whoever it gets referred to, usually through plastics because we have our admin infrastructure, and then we try and coordinate other appointments with all the other members as they're required. What we're trying to do is provide international standards for assessment and treatment, and that means that our patients, which we were discussing earlier on, get to fill out a lot of sort of quality of life questionnaires and reviews of how they feel, and we create a lot of data that we store to see if our outcomes are going to be any good or not. So we take standard photos, we take videos of our children, we take 3D photos of the children, and we measure all of these. And this is to show that our outcomes, good or bad, audit our outcomes, so if we find a problem in certain areas, we can act on it, and then try and flag up good areas to try and help other units. And by having this kind of standardized framework for treating patients, we can engage with all the other centres internationally and try and make a difference for facial palsy as a whole. So what are the kind of children we see? Well, children that have injuries on the facial nerve, we want to see them early so we can try and get repair sorted out. Bell's palsy in children is actually very uncommon. Those children who are about to have surgery for tumours, we like to see them, if the facial nerve is at risk, we try and give them some counselling and let them know that there are therapies out there just in case. We see established cases, we see complex cases with syndromic like Zach, and then those who've had traumatic deliveries, we see them to see how long does it take to recover and how many it doesn't recover in, because actually there's no really good quality data on that. So our treatments run from simple things like Botox to more sophisticated surgical procedures. And I'm only going to skip over these. because so if you have a child with a partial facial nerve palsy, then Botox is a good option. If you've got an adequate function on the weaker side, then the biggest problem is actually the difference in the two sides rather than the weakness per se. So by weakening the stronger side, you can restore the symmetry but not cause a functional problem for the child. The great thing about Botox is it's simple, it doesn't involve any surgeries or anesthetics necessarily, it's cost effective and it's temporary. If it doesn't work the way you want it, it'll wear off and we can try something else. Smile reconstruction surgery that we do using a muscle from the thigh called the gracilis muscle is used mainly for established palsies, but our children go through a number of appointments and they're carefully vetted before they undergo such a procedure, because what I want more than anything is firstly the child has to tell me they want something done, and they have to be motivated. They also have to be old enough to understand the pros and cons and what they realistically are going to expect, because the worst thing I want is to try and give them the impression that everything's going to be absolutely perfect and the smile will be exactly the same as the other side. So that's really important. And if they're showing any signs of doubt, come back in a few months' time, because it has to go right. And so the surgery we do is either 1- or 2-stage surgery, but like I said, I'm not going to go into the details today. We also have other kinds of surgery that we do. Again, I won't go into the details, but the main thing now is what is our future, what are our challenges here? So the first thing, from my perspective, is recognition of facial palsy as an issue, not as just a cosmetic thing. And we, certainly the charity and members of the board here, are really trying to flag that up, because things like funding can be an issue. From my perspective, I think it starts with teaching doctors to be aware of facial palsy. We're just discussing quite a lot of patients have delayed presentations. We heard from that email that Charles read out. And so getting in and trying to talk to doctors in training early on to flag up the fact that there are treatments for facial palsy is really important from my perspective. I hope in the next few years that we can have a facial palsy trainee in our hospital who will be near the end of their training and learn to do this surgery. Funding is an issue, and we're actively pursuing that, because in the dreamy world of NHS internal markets and all this kind of jargon, the hospitals have to be able to make a profit and not a loss out of it, ironic, isn't it? But that has to happen, so we're trying to redress the balance with regards to that. And finally, dedicated centres with MDTs, with motivated individuals who see lots of patients with facial palsy, I think, is the way forward for treatment. Now, I promised my managers I have to plug our new hospital in Alder Hey. You see, it's computer generated. It is being built. I've seen the foundations and a few bits of wall going up. They have all separate rooms which are en suite, so they're all computer generated rooms with computer generated children, which are apparently a lot quieter. Anyway, thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry about the trouble early on.